Hi, this is Craig Wesco recording for s2p.org, and today we're going to talk about if you can be vegan and believe in the God of the Bible. So this is a question that sometimes comes up where people say, well, God created animals to be eaten, and if we're not eating animals, we're not doing God's will. But actually, Scripture says the reverse. In Genesis 1:29, when God created us, He said we should eat fruit and vegetation. That should be our food. And so if He created us with this purpose, with this design to eat fruit and vegetation, then it's not the case that eating animals is what we should do. So that's the first verse. We're going to look at a few more. One I want to look at now is in 1 John 4:16, where it says, God is love, and he who abides in love abides in God, and God in him. So love is the key attribute of God. In Galatians 5:22, it also says the first fruit of the Spirit of God is love. So if we have God in us, if we have that love in us, then we're going to be bearing the fruit of that Spirit, and the first fruit is love. Others are joy, peace, etc. So if we have this love, and we're talking about animals, should we eat them? Should we harm them? Or should we show them love? Should we take care of them? Should we create an environment where they have a joyful and peaceful existence? Well, that's what God created us to do in the very beginning, before we started doing things our own way. So that's the first one. God is love, and if you have that love in you, then you will also bear the fruit of that love. The second verse I want to look at is in Matthew 5:48. So in Matthew 5:48, this is where Jesus says, this is part of the Sermon on the Mount, and he's talking about going the extra mile, to do more than is required of you. So don't just look at what you have permission to do, what God allows you to do, what you have the ability to do, but rather you want to really go beyond that. You want to say, I want to do more than just what I have to do. I want to do what's best. I want to do what's most pleasing to God. And so he says, go the extra mile. And when it comes to love, he says, don't just love your friends. He says also love those who can't love you back, who can't repay you. Love the orphans, love the widows, love the poor, love the needy, love the strangers, love the visitors, be hospitable. And then he says, this is the hardest one. He says, love your enemies. So he's saying, by saying love your enemies, and he demonstrates this when he's being executed, when he's dying, he prays to God. He doesn't say seek vengeance on these people who are executing me. He says forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. So Jesus, even of his executioners, is embodying this forgiveness that he's teaching. So he says love your enemies. In verse 48 it says, therefore you shall be perfect. Some other translations say you shall be complete, just as your Father in heaven is perfect, or complete. So if we're supposed to have this complete, impartial love, this love that is perfected in the sense that it's not withheld from anyone, not your enemy, not the poor, not the strangers, not the vulnerable, not anyone, that it should be all-encompassing, everyone should be loved. If you have this love of God in you, and that's the primary attribute of God, that's the first fruit of the Spirit, if you're bearing that first fruit, then that love is extended to everyone, no matter what. Now, if we're talking about animals, then do we want to say, okay, well, love everyone completely, but when it comes to animals, withhold your love from animals. Don't show them love. Don't take care of them. Instead, slit their throats, eat their flesh, kill them, take their babies away from them. I don't think so. I don't think that that's bearing the first fruit of the Spirit, namely love. That's not having God in you and being motivated by that love of God in you. That's how I would read the kind of love that God's calling us to. Not just the minimum kind of love, but the maximum love, the complete love, the perfect love of God that God is calling us to do. He created us in his image, and so we're supposed to embody that love of God. That's the image that we're created in. So now the last verse I want to talk about is John 14:12. So in John 14:12, Jesus says something that's kind of difficult for a lot of people to accept. He says, most assuredly I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I do, he will do also. And greater works than these he will do, because I go to my Father. So if we're supposed to do the works that Jesus did, that's the fruitage of the Spirit, the works of love, the works of humility, the works of righteousness, all these works that Jesus does, we're supposed to do those also, be imitators of Christ. But we are also supposed to do even greater things, because Jesus gives us his Spirit. And so if we're doing greater things and we're building on the things that Jesus gave us, we're not just doing the things that Jesus says to do. We're going the extra mile and doing more than just what Jesus requires of us. So if he requires of us that we're to love everyone, even our enemies, every person, then how do we go beyond that? Well, one way to go beyond that is to love animals. Okay, so if you love animals and don't withhold this love of God from animals, then that's a way to truly embody this love of God. So this is Craig Wesko recording for S2P.org.